Let's talk about how we could meadowize our lawns, or at least get rid of our lawns, or make our lawns a bit more biodiverse. So this is an episode that I wanted to film for a while because we've been doing a lot of different techniques with our lawns, trialing it out, seeing what we like, and I want to give you some options that maybe you could try at home. And keep in mind that, we're here in the Finger Lakes, it's zone 5-6. You may have different grass types or herbaceous perennials that are just better for your environment. So that's something to keep in mind. You don't always necessarily do exactly what we do because this is all experimental. And now I also want to say that a lot of folks will poo-poo on lawn. Like you'll hear, kill your lawn and get rid of it. It's not useful, but I don't want to totally poo-poo on it because there's a lot of things that lawn offers. So you can see here that we just have our regular lawn, it's mowed out. And this is great for walking, pretty much. Like this is our walking path. So it gives us direction to go to one place to another. So it's not just an amorphous blob of lawn. And that's one thing that like Sandra and I, if we're driving around town and we just see just like this immaculate lawn for days, there's nowhere to look. It just is really uninteresting. So we like the ability to cut some paths in the lawn and bring in some interest.
Yeah, it also provides order in a chaos. So if you like to have a lot of gardens and lots of wild grasses growing everywhere, having a super nicely trimmed and mowed path next to all of that, it makes the grass look even better, honestly.
Yeah, so it provides basically blank space, especially when it's butting up right against a very dynamic garden bed. That blank space gives a little break to your eye. Now, if you have pets or if you have children, having lawn space is obviously very good. I mean, as a child, I would also play in like tall fields before we knew what Lyme disease was, but I also would play in our yard as well. Like if you're kicking a ball around or anything like that, there's use for that. So I don't want to say like lawn is totally bad. There's pros and there's cons. Now, some of the cons that you'll often hear is it uses a lot of gas. So if you have a gas mower, we have both a gas and an electric mower. We have a push mower that's electric, and then we have our John Deere, which is gas powered. And if you're mowing constantly, then you're expending a lot of that gas energy. So you hear that. In this part of the world, we don't use a lot of pesticides or herbicides or even fertilizers for our lawn. But in other parts of the world, there is a lot of pesticides and herbicides. Some people will go in there and kill the dandelions in their lawn. So it really depends on your maintenance regime and what you're doing as far as your personal management of your lawn. But I would say that's not necessarily a con here because we don't treat our lawn in that kind of capacity. And even in the summer months, if it's a drought and the lawn gets brown, it's not like we're watering it all that much. We just let it go brown. And I'll talk about that later, why sometimes lawns will go brown in the summer months. So I would say another pro to having lawn is that it provides some temperature regulation. So even though the lawn is cut relatively short, I think we usually cut it, at around 3 inches?
Yeah, 2.5.
2.5 to 3. And you don't want to cut it too short because if you cut it too short, then you'll damage the grass and then it will also go brown. But this will provide some type of temperature regulation. So having like obviously bare earth is not that great. It will provide more temperature regulation if you let the grass grow out, which I'll talk about as well. So again, depending on where you are, lawn could be good, lawn could be bad. Oftentimes lawn grasses are not native grasses, so perhaps a lot of the wildlife or insects will not be able to use that lawn, and then you'll have a less biodiverse environment. Oftentimes it's like 1 or 2 or 3 different kinds of non-native or Eurasiatic grasses, so that's unfortunate. And so one of the options that you could do is, as I'd mentioned, just letting your lawn grow out. And this is our lawn that has grown out. This is probably some native grasses, some non-native grasses, but what you get from just mowing it less is that you get some more diversity in your lawn. It starts to become a little bit of a meadow. Now, we don't let this get too high. I think one of the things that we've learned is that we may have to mow this usually 2 to 4 times a year. Typically, we'll mow it in June or July, and then September and October. But this year, spring came early and the grasses were growing really high, so we'll probably mow this maybe 4 times a year, and then we'll mow the paths more frequently. Sometimes if it's a nice week, once a week. So that just gives you some of the idea of keeping it. So, and you have to kind of define what you want and your goal out of your lawn. This is some hawkweed coming up. So this is the orange kind and this is the yellow kind that's coming up as well. So you see, from letting it grow out, you're letting the flowers bloom and you're providing more of a pollinator resource. So let me step back before we go into the different ways of meadowizing your lawn and just stating the goals of what you want to create. Do you want to have more interest? Do you want to bring biodiversity? Do you want to have pollinator habitat? What is it that you're looking for? Do you want to put in gardens instead, with wildlife value? So if you state your goals of what you want, then perhaps you'll come up with some types of solutions to create a more dynamic lawnscape. So here we go. This is one that we left the current lawn as is, and we let it just grow up. Now also, if you recall, this is where we started to put some bulbs. So you don't see any of the bulbs now because they kind of taper off by the time June hits, and that's when we do usually a good mow. And you're seeing some of the native plants come up. So you see some of our plantains. So this is Plantago lanceolata. You have some Festuca rubra here. You have like the hawkweed, as I mentioned, some buttercups, some chickweed, some clover. We have penstemon in here. So you're starting to see a lot of this diversity, which you wouldn't normally see if you actually are constantly mowing over the lawn. Same thing here. We didn't really put in any new lawn seed or anything. This is just what's coming up. And we also put bulbs in this lawn. Now, this lawn is a different story. What we did here is that we took up the lawn completely. And then we added topsoil compost mix on top of this. So we put bulbs into this, and then we seeded it with native lawn grass.
All right, team. One last review just to make sure we're all on the same page. This is a path. Anything that is lawn will remain lawn. They're going to plant over there on that side, but this edge is our edge here, okay? Path, bulb bed, let's hit it. We're gonna have plenty of bulbs up here. I think that's fine. All right, steel rake time. much better. That's what we're after.
So we used, for example, Festuca rubra, which is our creeping red fescue. We used some Butalua gracilis, which is our blue grama grass, which is more of a warm season grass. And again, this is part of the reason why grasses tend to go brown in like a droughty summer, is because most of our lawn grasses are cool season grasses, which means that it comes up during the cool season. So like early spring and fall, that's when it's the greenest. If you have a droughty hot summer, then typically cool season grasses, that's when they go dormant. What we did here in this lawn, because we wanted to create more of a wildlife habitat and potential for insects, native insects, is that we went with a native lawn and we thought we'd try it out. We used lower grasses, so grasses that won't get 5 or 6 feet tall, but they'll stay 12 to 18 inches in some cases. Oftentimes the grass blade will be short, and then when the flower stalk or the inflorescence sticks up, that's usually the tallest part of the grass. And I accidentally overseeded it. So if you want to think about having a sparser lawn and not so dense, then I would seed it a little less or check out seeding rates. I just basically like hand threw everything in here. But the Butalua gracilis and the Butalua dactyloides, the buffalo grass and the blue grama grass, are warm season grasses. So they'll start to come up in the summer. So they're not even up now, but towards the late summer, early fall, you'll start to see their seed heads. And the seed heads that you're seeing now are more from our Festuca rubra, which is our cool season grass. So pairing cool season and warm season grasses is maybe a bit unusual, but I think it looks really beautiful. We were commenting the other day just how the wind just,
see it now,
yeah, comes through, and it's like these silvery inflorescences just blowing in the breeze, and it has these wave-like undulations. It's really pretty.
There it is.
Yeah.
On time.
Cute. So this obviously took a lot more work because you're removing the sod and you're reseeding grass, but this is just letting it grow up with whatever you had. Another option that you could do, and this was suggested to me by Frank Rossi, who's the turfgrass scientist at Cornell University, is if you find in your habitat that you have interesting grasses and herbaceous perennials growing around, well, one of the things you could do is cut out like maybe 1 meter by 1 meter, or even like a 2 to 3 feet, you know, of space, of grass, whether it's a square or a circle, and then just have that sod bare. So maybe you have to put in some compost topsoil mix, and then just see what seeds in. And I would recommend that if you see that you have interesting things around your area. Because if you just have like crabgrass and things that are not necessarily things that you would want, then what will probably seed in is that crabgrass. And that's actually one of the challenges that we had here. Because we seeded this in October, which is cool season, the Festuca rubra really took, but the warm season grasses didn't take until the summer. So we actually reseeded in the late spring in order for that flush for the warm season grasses, because the warm season grasses need like 3 or 4 days of 85-degree temperature in order to really germinate. So we had some crabgrasses and things move in, because remember, this was just bare earth. And I had to actually go in there and weed. So that it is a little bit more work and a lot more time consuming if you want to go that route. So if you just wanted to do a test sample and maybe cut out a little section of your lawn and see what seeds in, that could be another interesting thing. But again, do it if you think that there's interesting things within the area. So in addition to taking out the sod here, and we reseeded this in with native grasses, we also took the sod out here and put in a whole pollinator garden. So obviously, you know, killing your lawn, but keeping lawn-esque stuff in there, you could also do a full-on garden. And this is a garden bed that probably has over 350 different types of plants that are growing here, so really heavily diverse. It's definitely evolved over the 2 or 3 years that it's been growing. And some plants are starting to get much larger. For instance, like this geranium, I was not planning on it getting this large, but it's already pushing into the stackies. And I think this is a type of yarrow and some coreopsis that I have growing in there. You can see some of the alliums are past their prime. Now, another alternative is, I mentioned grasses, and I should also mention, you could create alternative lawns as well. We've trialed some clover lawns, we've trialed things like Johnny jump ups and like poppies and things like that. I didn't personally like that as much because there is something about grasses where you step on them and they're super resilient. I mean, obviously you could damage grass if you're constantly running over it or if it's wet and you're tearing it up, but it just seems way more resilient than like if it was all clover. So we have some clover in with the grasses here, and I don't mind that. But when it's just clover lawn and there's no grass for the structure, I just don't like it as much. And some of that clover can get pretty high if you don't like keep it down. So we had poppies, we had violas, we had this kind of alternative lawn mix that wasn't grass. And I personally didn't like it, but you might actually like it for your use. Now in here, and you might not be able to tell, but I can tell because I went in here and I planted sedge lawns, and you could see that this looks like grass, doesn't it? This is a grass right here, but let me take that out. All of this is a little sedge. And over here, this is another sedge. So I came in here and I seeded and planted a bunch of different sedges, and you can see all these different seed heads are slightly different. And sedges are important because it provides a host plant for a lot of our native insects. And native insects, like our caterpillars, are used by our native birds to feed their young. I thought, you know, why don't we go with something that looks grass-like?
And it does well in wet areas, right?
Yes.
That's the reason, like, this was very wet here.
And I decided that, like, because this is a low area, let's actually attempt to do some more sedges. And there's grass in here, of course. There's grass woven in with the sedge. But I really like this look. And sedges, this sedge tends to grow quite low, and some of them do well with mowing. And actually Mount Cuba Center, which is based out of Delaware, has done a really interesting carex study. Carex is a lot of our sedges. And they were doing trials about which ones work best in like dry shade versus wet shade versus full sun conditions versus what actually does well with mowing over. And so I would highly recommend that study if you want to look at that. And I planted all different types of carex types in here. Now I haven't gone through and seen what has come up. I think Pennsylvania sedge. I think I have path rush in here. There's quite a bit. I probably did about 12 different species. So I'd have to go back in here and see what has seeded. And I should also mention that carex seed is very fine. It's like a real fine dust. So it's, I would say that the germination rate might be a little low. So, but more and more people are doing plugs of carex, and I would recommend that. But this, I like that we have that diversity, even though you might not visually be able to see it. Now we took the sod out here, but in this one, we used cardboard. So we snuffed out the lawn. And that's another option that you could do. Down at the meadow house, we're planting right on top of the cardboard. So we're not even digging into the earth. But in this case with the shrubbery, I feel more comfortable when our shrubs and our trees are planted into the earth. So what I did was dug out part of the earth, planted the trees and shrubs directly into the earth, then put cardboard around the base, and then put compost. I put a lot of espoma raised bed mix in here. I used our composted bark mulch on top and really built up this bed. So this is another example where this had been lawn before, and now it's a very diverse shrubbery. All right, I'll show you another example of basically meadowizing your lawn areas. Let's go out to our meadow. All right, well, welcome to our very diverse meadow. So this is also an example of how we took an area that was essentially pretty weedy. So this wasn't lawn, it was more like gravel. Nature abhors a vacuum, and things will grow in there, whether it's things that you want or you don't want. Now, we seeded this entirely with seeds that we wanted. We didn't get enough seed to seed everything that we'd want. So a lot of the stuff that popped up was already in the seed bank, and you just have to be a little bit more either laissez-faire and take a laissez-faire attitude about it and say, you know, it's okay if this is coming up, or you have to go out there full throttle and you know, remove what you don't want. But I did plant some alliums in here, so if you recall, we planted a bunch of alliums. Not all of them are, you're right, not all of them are coming up this year. I mean, I see some allium heads that are getting really tall right now and that are popping up. But, you know, we'll just have to see if some of them took and some of them didn't. Here's another grass that is just so lovely. I'm not sure which one this is, but look at how beautiful it is. And it's just like this little clump. And that's what I did when I went in here. I kind of planted a bit more in clumps. So the flower heads are coming up, which are quite lovely. What we wanted to go with more like purples as far as inflorescences go for grasses. So when you take a view from far away, you could see some of these yellow and white flowers, purple flowers, and these like purple or silvery grass heads. Now, Erigeron is coming up. I seeded some of this, but I think some of it was naturally in the landscape. And there was a lot more Erigeron last year. And I think that as the meadow matures, so we're reaching year 3 here in the meadow, that the Erigeron will start to go away. Now here you're seeing the tail end of the lupin. So we have big chunks of lupin. We planted it over here where it was the rockiest part. And then we planted some on the other side of the pond over there. And so we have another much larger clump over there. And then I did plant some daisies. There were daisies already here. That's not a native plant, but I really love the look of daisies and lupins together. I also planted some red poppies because I was like, that red poppy, the lupin, and the daisies, they look so good. But the poppies ended up down there. So I might have accidentally spilled some because I think I attempted to plant the poppies next to the lupin, but you can't control the seed as much. And I know I have some side oats grama in here as well, side oats grass. And that might be somewhere here, but it doesn't get the inflorescence until later in the season because it's a warm season grass. And you'll see when we come down here, we're going to be flushing out quite a lot of birds. And this has become wonderful bird habitat as well. Some milkweeds in here. So I didn't plant any milkweeds, but the broadleaf ones are Asclepias syriaca. There's also one to the left of you coming up that looks like it's been already eaten. And this is the monarch butterfly food, but it actually provides food for a lot of other creatures as well. And some folks ask, well, why didn't I plant that in the meadow? And the answer is, it was already in the landscape. So if it was already in the landscape, I figured, well, it's going to move into the meadow because we already have it in the seed bank. I'm not sure what this is. It looks like a little bit of a chickweed of sorts. We have it around the ponds as well. This is the one that I wish we had a little less of. It's curly dock. It is a great medicinal plant and it has a really cool seed head. Some people use the seed heads as an alternative to like a flower or flower substitute. I think that would be a lot more work than I would want to do. But I have tried to come and cut some of that out within the landscape. Something that is really off the chain this year is our zizia. So this is our Zizia aurea. It's our native golden Alexanders. This comes up really early in the year. So we were seeing it like early May. We're now in the June season and it's beautiful. It's all over. So you'll see those golden clumps throughout. What I think is a challenge here is that in with the Zizia is also ragweed, which gives people a lot of seasonal allergies. So that plant in there with the Zizia is ragweed and it gets quite large as well. So we were mowing this earlier in the season, but you know, as with most things, it gets away from you. One of the other ways to get rid of your lawn, and I said snuff it out, so you could use cardboard, you could use thick wood chips. The other way you could do is solarizing. And this is an example of putting, you know, we put a black tarp over it. As Sander was mentioning at one point, he said you could do, you know, a type of glass or clear plastic or whatever and really solarize the lawn that way. But basically you're heating it up enough, covering it, and killing the grass beneath it. So we've been doing this since November of last year, and we're going to be doing it into the fall. And then we're going to do a seeding and plugging in some plants. And now plugs like landscape or deep plugs, we talked about that in an earlier video, so I'll link to that here. But we won't be able to afford all the plugs, so we're probably going to seed it as well. So this is something that we're doing with some of this grass that is a non-native grass, and you could see that once we do this, I'll probably take that and start solarizing this section because there's only so much tarp that we have. Now let's go back to the meadow house area. One thing I will say about this is that, and some folks had mentioned it, you will often kill a lot of the things that are under there, so the microbes, but a lot of the microbes will move out. And what you'll find under the tarps are like voles and snakes, because they like that heat. So I was removing one of the tarps that we were doing on the upper part, using it to solarize the lawn. And essentially there was like snakes that popped out of there and spooked me a little bit. So I mentioned wood chips. Now what we did here, is cardboard and wood chips. Now I did not have 12 inches of wood chips, but if you really want to kill the grass, from what I've heard from some of my friends who have successfully did it, is that you need somewhere between 8 and 12 inches of wood chips. And I've used maybe about 3 inches of wood chips here, and then it's cardboard underneath, essentially. So you can see some of the little worms under there and the cardboard, which they absolutely love. So I'm not gonna successfully kill the grass here, but with the cardboard and the wood chips, I think it'll suppress the grass quite a bit. Like I said, if you don't want to use the cardboard, you'd need somewhere between 8 and 12 inches of chips, which I would love to have enough chips to put on the grass to be able to do that, but it's challenging. And then here in these beds, as I shared before, this is just cardboard, and I'm putting organic matter or mulch on top to suppress the grass that way. And in this one, with the shrubs and the trees, I'm actually cutting down into the sod and then putting cardboard on top of it. Some of the grass will peek through like you see here, and then you'll just have to kind of manage that as you go. But these are just some of the ways that you could actually turn your lawn into something that's a little less yawn, a little less boring. Trying to think if one more way that you could do some kind of cool things. Those little plugs that I mentioned, I'll show you some plugs. I'll show you what they look like, just because I actually have some down here. Tray of plugs. And this is liatris, our native liatris, which actually happens to be endangered. And let me pull one out. This is an example of a plug. Now I plant these in the gardens. I mentioned planting them in the area that we're going to solarize. But another thing you could do is you take out a section of your lawn, say you dig into your lawn, and you put a plug in. And that's another way to make your lawn a bit more dynamic. So you could leave the grass as is, and then you could actually plug in some interesting varieties. Now these get quite high, so what I did in the native lawn is that in addition to the bulbs, we also planted some low-growing native herbaceous plants in there as well, which start to flower usually in July, August, and September. They weren't plugs, they were just like kind of regular 3.5 inch to 4 inch plants, but this is an economical way to help make your lawn a bit more dynamic. Yeah, a lot of these plants are able to be mowed once in a while. So you know the area up in our lawn where we have the buttercups, and you mow them really low, and in the garden they're high, and in the lawn they're just growing low. So they'll have another flush, but they'll just be a little bit shorter. But repeatedly, it's a good point, repeatedly mowing this is probably going to kill the plant. But I think the best thing you could do is treat it like we're treating the lawns up there, which are like the bulb lawns. We're only cutting it maybe 2 to 4 times per year.
Yeah, that's also what's happening on this road section here near the road. You have a lot of grass that's growing tall. Mm-hmm. You're planting a lot of plugs there to try to like have them overtake the grass.
Yes, or at least work with the grass so it's not just grass. I find it to be much more beautiful when you have grass in with the matrix of herbaceous perennials. And I find that to be much more meadow-esque. And so typically when you're thinking about doing a meadow, you'd often have a matrix of grass, maybe 50 to 75% grasses to herbaceous perennial. The rest would be herbaceous perennials, and that would be flowers, essentially. So what we would consider flowers. Grasses have flowers too, inflorescences, but not ones that we often think about. Hopefully that gave you a lot of food for thought. I am a real believer in making your lawn more dynamic for all different kinds of reasons, maybe bringing in some biodiversity, giving some visual interest, creating wildlife habitat, all that good stuff. And maybe you'll trial some of those where you are. We're going to continue experimenting in the landscape here at Flock and recording our progress, findings, and results. So stay tuned here if you don't want to skip a beat. And a special thank you goes out to all of our viewers, subscribers, and of course our esteemed members who really help support the channel month over month. If you want to find out more on how you can become a member, click the join button on the Flock Finger Lakes YouTube homepage for more information. Thank you, and we'll see you in the next video.